Hey, everybody, welcome to International Podcast Day 2017. Make sure you're using hashtag International Podcast Day out there, sharing your favorite podcast, and also connecting with podcast listener enthusiasts out there. Well, this hour we have Larry from Zimbabwe. Larry, how you doing tonight? All right. Larry is a writer, award-nominated actor, radio presenter, podcaster, blogger, and digital strategist. He is the founding editor of pioneering media site 3-mob.com with its own podcast using hashtag 3mobradio. He's a presenter and producer of a longtime running podcast, Kwirirayi, talk show host on a national radio station, and among plenty of other things as well. Larry is passionate about uncovering new and compelling ways of telling engaging stories. He also likes knitting. Well, before we get into Larry's contribution to International Podcast Day, I did want to reach out and thank our sponsors of this year's event. Blueberry is a full-service podcasting company, a turnkey solution that will allow a new or veteran podcaster to get set up and running within 15 minutes. Pay them a visit at blueberry.com. Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a full-service cafe with 2 working podcasting and video casting studios. The grand opening happens September 30th, where they'll be broadcasting live throughout the day. Pay them a visit at studio21podcast.cafe. The Messengers, a podcast documentary, is a journey through the modern world of podcasting, uncovering the magic behind why podcasters do what they do. Get your copy of The Messengers in iTunes and in Amazon by visiting themessengersdoc.com. Thank you to Potable. Looking for your next favorite podcast? Potable revolutionizes podcast discovery by providing podcast recommendations tailored to you specifically. Start by going to play.potable.co. That's play.podibble.co. And finally, thanks to the Audacity Podcast, Modern Life Podcast Network, and Podbean. Well, Larry, it is great to have you. How are you doing this evening?
I'm great. It's afternoon over this side, so pretty awesome.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we appreciate you representing yourself, your podcast, your experience, and of course, Zimbabwe here on the official International Podcast Day event. With that, I'm going to get out of your way, and we look forward to your contribution.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Okay, so I think the key thing I want to say is that it's such an incredible honor to be here on International Podcast Day, because one of the key things is why I named my presentation starting a podcast in a country that didn't care for one, is because, given the background of our country, the issues of cost, we don't have that much money at the moment and haven't had for a while, in terms of income and so forth. So getting content out to people is a lot more expensive than probably a couple of other countries across the world. The cost of our data is pretty high. It's not like incredibly high, but it's to put it simply, it costs about I'd say $1 to get about 250 meg. When it's on promotion on one of the bigger, so what you call it, mobile internet platforms in the country. So asking someone to spend $1 a day in order to download content and that sort of thing, that becomes something that's a bit difficult. And also it was also when I did say to people that I wanted to start a podcast, or rather a podcast which are called Kwirirayi. Well, it was kind of seen as one of those things where people looked at you like, why would you do that? Why don't you just try go to radio? And what I said was like, there were not enough opportunities on radio. There still aren't enough opportunities on radio. There are a few more stations now than when I started 4 years ago, but there weren't that many radio stations to do work with. And also, if you look at the structure of radio is a bit too structured, and there's a tendency to what you call it, to tell you how to communicate, as opposed to just communicating whatever you're passionate about. So I'm also going to give you also tips that don't necessarily just apply to people who are living in developing countries, and especially developing countries that are going through difficult things. And thank you very much, Penguin. I know that feeling. It is just as expensive here in South Africa. I know you guys had the hashtag, the hashtag that said, I think your hashtag was data must fall. We also tried with this side, but it's a completely different kettle of fish. Now, going back to what I was talking about, and as far as as trying to communicate. And by the way, this is a fluid conversation, so please feel free to comment at any point. Just comment at any point. I will take on your questions. I'm not trying to have a structured one where I'm going to speak and then say question time. So if you have any questions about anything that I'm saying at any point, please put them up, and then I'll answer them as best as I can. Now, the cool thing about being the first Zimbabwean from international to come to International Podcast Day is that I can mess up, and people are like, okay, it's fine. But it also, there's also the pressure not to mess up, because, you know, then the world would be like, we never want another Zimbabwean from International Podcast Day. And for me, this opportunity stems from the fact that I wanted to open doors for other young podcasters that are coming from Zimbabwe. There's some young podcasters that now are coming into the game. There's a podcast network that's growing up and so forth. And people come to me and ask, how can I start a podcast and so forth? And those are some of the things I'll talk about, especially speaking to people from developing countries who do not have as many resources to start one. Now, the key thing in all of this is, David asked me to mention this, but I actually ended up in a national tabloid. Like, oh yeah, he's going to be the first Zimbabwean speaking at International Podcast Day. It was a big deal, so I'm pretty excited. I put it up on my Instagram. I'll give you all my details, and as far as that is concerned, at the end of the program. Now, I'm going to start off by telling you what then happened. But before that, I had been on radio. I think this was in 2009. I was on another national radio station between 2009 and 2010. And then I left that, and I still needed to communicate with people, but I needed to communicate on my own terms. And the reality of the situation is, I had friends who had studios, and my friends kept saying, come through to the studio, but they just didn't come through. And I was like, no, this is not going to happen. This is going to be terrible. And, I was sitting there, and, I was probably freaking out more than John Oliver. He's got a hypochondriac type of situation. So I was freaking out, like, no. It took a year of just trying to get my friends to get me to, because these guys are music producers and so forth, to get them to record me in their studios. But then I realized, oh, wait a minute, laptops have microphones. They have microphones. I could just use the microphone on the laptop. The sound isn't going to be great, but it will achieve the purpose. And that's the thing that I wanted to do. So what I did was, I had an HP Mini. It wasn't a great microphone. A little HP Mini, that's what I was using at that point. And I recorded an episode, and I was like, oh, how do I edit? There's this new invention. I don't know if you heard about it. It's called Google, okay? It happened to be the ones that are hosting the Hangout. I Googled, what's the best podcast editing platform? And then there was Audacity. I downloaded it. I tried my way around. I just put the first one together. And at that point, got a lot of production things wrong, music and so forth. But that goes on to my next point. Okay, my first point being, always just use what you have. So don't overthink it. Don't think about, I don't have this, so I can't achieve my dream. So look at your resource base and say, what can I do with what I have? What is it that I can achieve with the little that I have in order to get my objective? Secondly, then what happened was I got this Audacity platform, but I had never edited sound. So what did I do? I Googled how to do this. I messed about a bit. I tried this, tried the other thing. I thought, okay, should I put a music bed and so forth? And then when I did have a music bed, I sent it out, and one of my friends said, like, oh, if I want to listen to you more, I don't want the music bed. Because, in doing that, I was thinking in radio terms, in traditional radio terms. So they say, I always have a music bed because you don't want to have dry air and that sort of thing. So I put up a music bed and so forth. And it was music that I'd composed years ago in my past life. So I did that. It came out. And it goes on to my it touches quite candidly my third point rather. The second point is keep learning. So find the technology. Once you get technology, keep working, keep learning, looking for different platforms. I started off hosting on SoundCloud, then I went to Spreaker. I've got a different partner that I'll tell you about. They're doing some incredible work, especially for developing and emerging markets in as far as how their data, the system actually works. So the next thing you need to do is, like, while you're learning how to produce, you also want to make sure you focus on the content quality a lot more than on the technology, because the content quality is what people are going to listen to. If you don't have the content quality right, what you're going to end up with is a nice sounding podcast. It sounds great. It sounds incredible. It's like, whoa, it's got the singers, it's got the bangs, it's got all that other stuff, but it adds no value to the listener. One of the things I always tell young people, and this is including my media guys, because I have media guys that I mentor, that it's important to get it right. Get the story right. Or if it's an opinion, get it right. Make sure that you know your alliteration, you speak well, speak correctly, speak clearly, speak candidly. Make sure that the information is well researched and that sort of thing. So respect the audience. That's the most important thing. You've got to make sure that the audience will walk away with it with value. I also say, always produce something that you would listen to if it was produced by somebody else. It's a key important thing, because if you won't listen to it, like if you can't listen to your podcast for its quality ever again, because you'll be like, oh no, how do you expect somebody else to listen to it? And a key part of that, of course, is then making sure that you also listen to other people's podcasts. I cannot stress that enough. Make sure you listen to other people's podcasts and learn a lot from them. Appreciate other people's contents. Make sure that you learn content making skills. One of the ones I follow I support a football team called Arsenal that plays what some of the world might call soccer, but we call football in the rest of the world. Is there's this guy who's got a platform called Arsblog, and it's incredible what he does with that platform and that sort of. So I learn simple production of content skills. Yes, Gunners, the admin just said. The creation of incredible content, the type of content you'd be like, you just read the headline. Sometimes you don't even read the headline to say what does Arsblog have and so forth. After that, what you need to learn is consistency. So as much as possible, the first time earlier I was doing it once a month because I was trying to make sure that I could get a production schedule on point. Then at some point there was a greater demand, and then it became once a week. And there's only a few weeks that I've missed since then. This week I released episode 180. So when you look at it, just that consistency, people must know that there will be a podcast on this day every week. What that does, it creates what they call appointment listening. Somebody says, okay, if I don't have my podcast this week, there's a problem. It's gotten to the stage where if I miss by a day, people are like, oh, wait, where's the podcast? I'll be like, okay, pressure. But, and also make sure that you always, throughout the week, as you build up to the point where you're producing the content, always be writing down content. Say, okay, this is going to be my podcast. So instead of waiting for the day to start writing your content and so forth, keep writing throughout the week, make journals, make notes and so forth, and say, okay, this would be fun to discuss this week. This would be a great topic and that sort of thing. And try and include as much feedback into the production as possible. So sometimes what I do is, if there's a question that I want to develop content around, I go onto my social media platforms and ask this question. And also I use WhatsApp for people to send me voice notes, and so they can send me feedback that I play on the show. So it has that organic effect. And also, if somebody believes that the content is going to be included on a platform, they will be inclined to listen to it and to also share it. So that will help you to grow your audience. It makes sure that your audience is engaged, they feel as part of the process as you are. And it also opens your mind, because it's not just you now, speaking to a soundboard and making, just talking really. And then the next thing is, you need to tell real, authentic stories that come from where you come from. Unless, of course, when Prince died, I was like, yeah. I can say that I was sadder when Prince died than when Michael Jackson died. But when Prince died, I was like, no, this is the most. So I had to include that in my podcast, because it was an important part of me growing up, becoming a multi-faceted, artist, as well as whatever it is, put your application and that sort of thing, and the ability to expand yourself, and as far as appreciation of content and creation of content. By the way, guys, as I said, if you have any questions, please put them up as we go. We don't have to wait until the end of the book, towards the end. I'm not going to prompt you at the end. I might prompt you at the end, but you can ask me questions. You can make contributions as and when we go. So then, after you've done that, you need to then start networking in what they call working the room. And working the room is not just social media. You need to actually go out there. I go to places and I speak at events, and so I volunteer to speak at panels, and sell yourself. Tell them what you do. And also, because you're talking about podcasting in a country that didn't care for one, you need to explain to people what a podcast actually is. And sometimes you need to send instructions to people on how they can actually listen to it. I remember early days, you'd send the podcast link to someone, and they'll be like, okay, so I will tune in, because they think it's a radio show that you're going to go into. And so for them, then they ask you, what channel is it going to be on? You need to then explain the technology. So because you're coming from a country or in a market that doesn't know it, doesn't appreciate the technology, you need to actually explain what it is. And I found that by explaining what it is what you call it, people end up listening. And you also then, a clever thing that I did was, if I knew somebody was interested in my type of content, I also told them about other type of podcasts, so that they realize that podcast is a culture. So it's not something that you do as an isolation. You're not some crazy weirdo at home in your room, talking into a sounding board and just saying, okay, this is what's up. So they need to realize that it's not an anomaly. It's a progressive movement. There's a lot of work that's happening around it, and that's the key aspect of it. And in as far as creation of content, have the conversation with people and say to them, this is what it is. And there are loads more people doing it. And I'm one of the people that's trying to make this culture grow within this country, and that sort of thing. Also, make sure you understand the laws. Okay, understand the laws around this. This is not something that's unique to Zimbabwe. Understand the laws in as far as what kind of content you can put out. And also, there's some people who just put music on. Go and read up on a lot of that stuff. And I know that a lot of guys in Zimbabwe don't necessarily check up on the legal stuff before they do anything. I'm not talking about censorship and that sort of thing, because I think when you think about issues of censorship, if you think about the censorship first of all before the content, then you always second guess yourself. And then when you've done that, you need to partner. Let me just answer this from the Penguin. You find it difficult to get people to tune into podcasts, especially in Zimbabwe? Absolutely. Like I say, the data costs are a big issue, first of all. Secondly, the understanding of what a podcast is an issue. So people have become used to listening to the radio stations and that sort of thing, and they think this is how all audio gets sent out. Or the closest they'll come to audio content creation is if they send a voice note via WhatsApp and so forth. So getting people to understand that this is something you can download or stream at any other time, is on demand, and that sort of thing, that becomes the difficult thing in terms of convincing people to get into the podcast culture. I was talking to my friend XT Ndela from Kenya. He says they're also having an issue, a similar issue in Kenya, where although I think they're a little bit further than us because of the greater appreciation of technology that there is in Zimbabwe, the reality is that getting that culture where people understand it, they say, okay, you can also listen in. And also what has helped is me trying to encourage other people to set up their own podcasts and that sort of thing, and learn from the experience. And once you get more people producing content of a specific nature, then it becomes a habit that people pick up. So then next thing after the networking that I was talking about, make sure you create the right partnerships. So I'm here, my internet connection is sponsored today by one of the biggest internet companies, or if not the biggest internet company in Zimbabwe, Zol Zimbabwe. Now, they've also often provided me with internet access to upload my podcasts and that sort of thing. So essentially that helps a lot in as far as having the right partnerships. And then also a hosting partner in Unwanted.fm. They have great, they have a device, they have one of the key things that made me excited about them is that their platform picks up the device identification. So if you offer 3G network, they will realize they'll pick up it's off a 3G network. And also there's a lot more other global broadcasters and so forth, and different levels of broadcasting that they provide. They've also got live streaming, podcasting, and also they expanded what I could do with the podcast, because when you now understand that there's a lot of technology that exists for you to in as far as hosting, you start also challenging yourself to fully exploit what the hosting platform does. I'm going to ask Goon Squad Tube, thank you very much for cheating. Have you found that it's hard to garner local support, or do people in Zimbabwe buy into the idea once they understand it? I think people, there's certain groups of people, especially millennials, who buy into something because they find it interesting. Also, I think one thing you can't run away from the concept of having to create great content. So if people see the tagline is great content, it's like amazing. You're talking about current affairs, a hot topical issue, and I don't want to say controversial, but it's something that garners a lot of debate. If they see that, they'll click on it and they'll go listen to it. Sometimes people click on some content because they're curious about that specific content. But I found that there's a lot of appointment listening. And what has helped is that I've created broadcast lists for WhatsApp, and the WhatsApp broadcast list, I've got people from across the world. And the WhatsApp broadcast list, I've got like 5 broadcast lists. They're all on 256. I've just started another one. So take advantage of that technology. And so, and that the one that you send via WhatsApp, because in Zimbabwe, the WhatsApp as a service is bundled in as far as technology. So you can get a bundle that just gives you WhatsApp and Twitter access only. And so if somebody's got WhatsApp access and Twitter access only, and you send them a 3 meg file, as opposed to the full file, which is normally about 18, 19 meg, because you want to get great quality, they're more likely to receive it, just download it and listen to it at their pleasure. Now, the key thing is I've never added people without their permission. So always make sure you ask people if they want to join the WhatsApp list. Normally I put it out on my Twitter, my Facebook. If you want to get onto the WhatsApp broadcast list to listen to the podcast, then that's a good thing. I have a great story in as far as that I've got a couple of kids out in Russia who listen to my podcast every Friday. So they get it on the weekend, and then on Friday they sit around at the university and they listen to the podcast and they send me feedback and how on the podcast itself, or what they think I can improve on. And only one of them is a Zimbabwean. And then another great story in as far as how far a podcast can go. There was a doctor that was coming to Zimbabwe with Doctors Without Borders. So he was coming to Zimbabwe as Jacopo. He was coming from Italy. And before his assignment, a month before his assignment, while he was going to work, he was listening to the podcast every single morning. And he said he learned a lot about Zimbabwe from that. And from that, he also started sharing the podcast with other people. So I think also it's important for you to then say, the podcast doesn't necessarily have to be listened to by Zimbabweans only. It's got to represent your story, that is a universal story and that somebody can have an understanding of where you come from. But certainly, as I said, in Zimbabwe, once people get it, they get it. But sometimes some people listen to it because, hey, there's something topical that's on it, and that speaks to the issue earlier on that is about content. So as I said, I will be when your questions come in, I will come and respond to your questions, and we'll keep the conversation going. Now, the next thing I want to talk now about is about the content creation process, and I think that's something that many people don't, and not just in Zimbabwe. The content creation process. Go and read about how to create content. Don't try to invent a new wheel. Yes, break the rules only when you understand them. So you can't be trying to break rules if you don't understand what the rules are. And that's like a very super important thing. And it's like you need empirical evidence in as far as what is concerned. So even the creation of the podcast itself, right from the start, you need to know what the rules of a podcast are. And often I always say, okay, people ask me, oh, what about the swearing, about all of that? You have to decide what you want to achieve with that podcast, because it doesn't fall under regular broadcast listening. So what you decide, what do you want to know? And also, just look at my notes. You do not. Sometimes you do not even have to know why you want to know that. I will tell you right at the beginning when I started my podcast, I thought it was going to be about this thing. But as I learned myself during the podcast process, once I learned a lot about what I do and what sort of personality I was evolving into, it also changed. And also I started realizing, okay, there's certain content that I thought was great, but isn't that great. And so you also have to do what I often say is find out what you're good at and repeat it. Okay, find out what you're brilliant at and repeat it. So become a creature of habit in as far as the production process is concerned. The creativity, the actual contents and so forth, that's a completely different, but find what processes you are good at and keep repeating them. That consistency cannot be overemphasized. And that's the reason why now you find there are people that often say, oh, Larry, you know what, one thing about you is that you're consistent. And it's not just in podcasting, it's just in anything in life. Always be seen as the person who does that. And well, in as far as that is concerned, when I talked about you do not have to know why, sometimes there is that over preparation where you spend so much time preparing that you don't end up getting it right, because you almost self-sabotage. And when I say self-sabotage, is that it's like a guy who sees a hot girl and says, oh, she's awesome, and he has the whole conversation with himself in his head about how she might or might not respond. And at the end of the day, he ends up not having the conversation because it's already decided that she's going to say no. And that's the same thing about the processes. And it's also going back to even right at the beginning. Don't spend too much time having the conversation around how do we do, because if you spend a lot of the time thinking about what might not work and so forth, at the end of the day, the things that might not work will become bigger. It will always seem bigger than the things that work. So, for example, the data issues that I talked about earlier, the environment not being ready for one and so forth. If you thought about that, you're going to go home and sleep and have a bit of a cry. And you've got to challenge yourself into that space. And it's a personality issue in that one of the things I didn't worry about right at the beginning was the numbers, because at least the thing I always say, at least I was able to fail in silence, if you want to call it that. So it wasn't too big at that point. So there were times I was umming and ahhing, and I was down and all that other stuff, and saying certain things. And now if I listen to them, I cringe. And like, whoa, whoa, whoa. By the time I started getting good numbers, the audience was becoming more receptive. What happened is that I had developed the skills over time in order to be able to achieve the objective, that is, in order to be able to communicate, in order to be able to do the things that I felt were the objective of the podcast. And also I was then more confident to evolve it and say, okay, to get more ratings, this is what I need to do. We need to do work on this. Okay, this is something that there's a new skill that is being developed. And so let me develop a lot more of this skill in order to make sure that, I produce the content that I think the audience deserves, that I think anyone, to what you call it, to sort of grow yourself and grow the brand. And love that, an opportunity to fail in silence. Absolutely, I cannot overstate that. Sometimes we jump too quickly right at the beginning to want to advertise ourselves like we're already the biggest. No, just see, get the feedback. I get people, develop a relationship with your audience, develop your relationship with your brand. Because you're sometimes learning your brand at the same time as your audience. And as you go, some of the things you thought about your audience, about your brand, are not it. You just thought that was it. But then now, at least when finally you get called by a national newspaper and they ask you, oh, so what's your podcast about? You're like, yeah, it's about this. But if you had asked me 3 years ago, I didn't have as much clarity as I have right now about the brand. Which takes me to that, in as far as the brand. I always say that you need to be constantly working on your publicity, on your branding, even if you're not putting an episode out. So what I mean by that is social media. Get heavy on that. Get in people's faces. There's so many people who think that, okay, I have this great content, I'm just going to put it there. I'm just going to leave the content there, and it's great content, and people should just listen. Okay, why wouldn't people listen to my great content? I've got great content. But it's like Zig Ziglar said, if doing something without advertising is like winking at a girl in the dark. You might know what you're doing, you're probably great at it, but no one else does. So with all the social media chatter, the noise, be out there, get in people's faces, and also promote other people's work. Because when you retweet somebody's work, they're more likely to say, okay, this guy supports me, let me also retweet his work. And also invite people. I've invited people just to be guests on my podcast, and also invite somebody who isn't a celebrity. If it's a celebrity, great, but get somebody who is the regular person, and just give them the broadcast experience. And that's the key thing. And after I gave a couple of people the broadcast experience, now I get requests from people to say, I want to do this. I want to be able to go and do the broadcast experience and so forth. So teach them the broadcast experience by when they sit and they say, oh, I can actually do this. Hopefully when they go home, they can decide to do a podcast of their own, because they've seen the process, and be there with them as you're editing. Because what I do is I edit on the fly. You could do it as they're there, and so that when they have the experience of a production of a podcast, they can go and explain to somebody that they've got a podcast. And it's a human condition we have. We like to be the person that knows, so that when somebody says, oh, what's this? What's the thing? What a podcast? Well, don't you know? I know what a podcast is. Yeah, so you get a bit smug and that sort of thing. The Penguin ZA says, do you find that getting your content out initially is a challenge at first? How did you finally break through? It is a challenge at first, because I don't think I think I had great marketing skills, but marketing a podcast is a completely different kettle of fish. And this is so I used basic marketing principles for any product. Any new product that comes onto the market, you've got to get in people's face. Venancio, thank you very much. I love that too. Okay, thank you very much for being part of the conversation. Make sure that you get the principles of marketing right. So, as I said, be in people's faces. If a brand new product, if it's a brand new car, a brand new TV series, whatever it is in people's faces. Let's put it this way. Game of Thrones is the biggest TV show in the world. But they advertise like they've just started. So you need to make sure that you keep the noise going. If you can see the name, my name on my WhatsApp, it's not my name. It's my podcast. And I mentioned that it's available on iTunes and on iono.fm. So when people check out my WhatsApp status or they check out my WhatsApp name, it's the name of my podcast. So when people now see me in the streets, so some people stop calling me Larry, they now call me Kwirirayi. So you're getting people to have the to refer to you by a product. So one day somebody refers to you as Kwirirayi, what are they going to do? Oh, his name is Kwirirayi. They're going to Google it. They're going to find you. So there's all these underground marketing things that you can do. And but when you finally break through, somebody sees that you've been doing, you're on episode 35 or you're episode 50, they'll be like, oh, this guy is committed. And in terms of monetization of it all, then that comes into play, because people then like, oh, you've got 180 episodes. That means you're up to something. And that's the breakthrough that happens. If it says be mentioned, my apologies, I've been away. So, okay, no, it hadn't been mentioned. So that's the aspect that you want to do. Keep working on it. There is no substitute for advertising it. Make it noisy. Get it in people's faces. Make sure that people get sick of you. And by the time that they're done, when you've left the room, they'll be like, oh, okay, that guy, okay. And when one day they want to talk to somebody about podcasts, and they're having a conversation in an airport somewhere, or in the rural areas somewhere, they're like, yeah, there's this thing I know about. It's called a podcast, and this guy called Kwirirayi, because they don't know any other podcast. Then you make the breakthrough. So get in people's faces. To use the Game of Thrones strategy, which is just over advertise. Don't be annoying, but just over advertise. What am I looking at next? Okay, so I was talking about in as far as the another key thing, and as far as also making the breakthrough, is get your friends to support you. If you have to guilt them into doing it, if you have to emotionally blackmail them and say, but I came to your birthday party when you were 3, do it. Because if your family cannot get in on it, your friends and family cannot get in on it, it's going to be difficult for you to get a stranger on it. If you can convince your family to listen to it, if you get your friends to listen to it, and becomes a voluntary action that they do every week, like every week, okay, it's time to listen to what Larry's got to say, whether they think it's fun or whether they just think, no, sweet, he's doing this other thing. And then later on, they're like, oh, he's doing that thing, which is what the experience was. Because when you go and tell your mom, Mom, I'm running a podcast, she'll be like, what's that? It's like radio. So why don't you just go back to radio? It's not like radio. It's got this. You got to explain to her. And the ability to explain to somebody who doesn't understand makes you understand it a lot more, because once you just call it a podcast and you don't break it down to what it actually is and so forth, sometimes you will get the process wrong because you're only understanding it on surface level and not understanding the whole thing. So get your family and friends, if you're into religion, people at church, social circles, just get everybody listening. If you've got to give it, meet them and give it them via share it, do that. Make sure that they listen. Tell them where to find it. Always say on your podcast where people can find the podcast, even if they're listening to it, because they might be listening to it because it was just forwarded to them. So always say where it can be found and how you can be contacted and all that sort of thing. You'll be surprised by the number of people that get in touch with me over a subject that I talked about. And then they say, oh, but could you also talk about this? Because it's important for me. I have this problem that I have, and you end up creating content in as far as that is concerned. I'm just gonna had a bit of. We've got 20 minutes, and get some questions if you want to get some questions in around the things I talk about. But while I'm waiting for the questions, what is the next thing on my notes? Yes, you have to think also on a very human level. When I say I've got Para Joanna says, I think you also do a good job by sending the latest podcast. Sometimes I forget when it pops up on my WhatsApp. Hey, Para listens. So you always send that appointment listening, always send the latest episode and that sort of thing. And in as far as your podcast is concerned, always give it an opportunity to get people to know what you're up to. Okay, based on the type of experience, the podcasting experience I've had, and in doing that, it created the opportunity because my blog is a media blog. It's a news focused blog. So the podcast that is on the media blog is almost exclusively interviews. So you go and interview someone, you edit it, and 3 Mob Radio, you put it out. Also, ask for permission if there's somebody who's got a great audio that you want to feature on your platform. You can say, hey, can I get a bit of your audio now, and I'll sell where we got it from and so forth. Also, take advantage in as far as if you're a news-focused blog, take advantage of what you call it, of what you can learn from live content development platforms, because a news-focused podcast comes off a little bit different because it's got to be very factual. Ours tend to be a lot of interview-based. So there's a festival here in Zimbabwe that's called the Shoko Festival. We've had artists from South Africa, from the Black Lives Matter in the US, and from Kenya, and that sort of thing. So always make use of the networks you have to get the great content you want to have. So if you want to interview somebody who you don't have access to, make sure that you create such a great network that if you say, I need so-and-so, access to so-and-so, they will help you get it. And when you go and have the interview, I always try to make sure that the interviews seem like they're off the fly. They come across as very, very friendly. And people say, oh, Larry, your interviews are so different. And before you get the guest coming in, make sure that you've fully researched the guest. So make sure you pronounce their name properly. Make sure you introduce them to your audience properly, and ask them questions that are as if you know them. Okay, so one of the most annoying things, what inspired this? When did you start singing? No, you should have found that on the internet. It's written somewhere. Someone out there has told the world, he has told the world when he started doing his work or her work, whatever the case may be. So make sure you research your guest very well. And also make sure that sometimes we sometimes interview guests that are not necessarily popular or mainstream in as far as a news-focused podcast is concerned, because you want to make sure that you give people lessons and get people learning, but also bank a lot of podcast interviews. So you make sure that you have like what we're planning to do from just the second week of October. We're going to be releasing an interview with somebody that we've been banking and so forth until the end of the year. So to get that appointment listening where people believe there'll be a news something or the other, an interview, whatever the case may be. So we've banked enough for 2 months of content. And while we're doing that 2 months, we're going to be adding more content, and hopefully this becomes a feature in which we will always have interviews being released on our platform. So that's the schedule, what you're going to have to do, and what you're going to have to do, and if you're going to go that route, or if you're planning to go that route, is to make sure that you work the hours. There is no substitute for it. You can't you can't trick your way around it. Then the concepts that I talked about, you got to work the room, And as the Penguin just say, there, keeping to your schedule is so highly important. Absolutely, you got to keep working. People have got to believe that they can now rely on you for content, even if it's stuff that they're not normally interested in. And sometimes they might listen to you because they expect you to give them something that they would never get anywhere else, an experience that they'll never get anywhere else. And that could be your unique selling point in as far as your production of content is concerned. And as I said, as the Penguin said, keeping to a schedule cannot be overstated. It's such an important thing. Now, the opportunities that the podcast has done, of course, the monetization that I talked about, being able to partner with companies, sometimes able to run adverts or run ad campaigns, and sometimes based on a whole digital platform using social media collateral and so forth. We've been able to put that as part of a selling point that we give to people. I've had situations where I get paid to have interviews, a long 30-minute interview with somebody on the podcast, and you make money there. And so essentially, what you do have is from that perspective, is you beginning to make income because people trust you, the fact that you got processes. Do you host podcast and meetups in Zimbabwe? At the moment, no, because at the moment they are based in Zimbabwe, probably 2 or 3 regular podcasting networks, and they're not quite big, so not at the moment. I have gone to a podcast and meetup in South Africa, that I went and attended, and that was an opportunity that came up from the podcast. I was asked to come and speak there, flew me out there and had a conversation there. It was good stuff. And no, unfortunately, we're not quite there. But I'm hoping that with more podcasting beginning to happen now, I can start organizing podcast and meetups. And next year on International Podcast Day, we could have a podcast and meetup next year, and hopefully. So no, unfortunately. So some of the opportunities it's created, I've ended up getting back into mainstream radio. So because there was a recognition that I was creating a lot of content, and content was creating traction. So I host one of the prime time talk shows on a station called ZFM Stereo. That's where I do work. And so those are opportunities that come up. I've been called, by a satellite company in Africa called DSTV MultiChoice. They've flown us different places across the world, as to promote material and so forth. So you're creating content. So it also has, as I said, created my big experiences in life, and also locally being sent to resorts and so forth, and having conversations with managers and stuff like that, and just understand the world, and also creating the podcast series. And that's the next thing that we're going to be going into, the first podcast series that are going to have a limited term series, because I've realized that there's a lot of Zimbabweans who are creating businesses. It's going to be called How to Start a Business. So it's going to be 6 episodes on 6 steps about how to start a business. And it's going to include things such as tax issues, how to maintain the dream, how to end a business sometimes if it's not working. So it's always about trying to create content that benefits somebody in the long run or in the short term and so forth. As I say, you be helpful and be kind. It cannot be overstated. I know social media has become a fan of what they call clapbacks, where you just will be rude to somebody, but be kind, be absolutely kind to someone. You lose absolutely nothing from being kind to someone in that respect. Just checking our time, we still got a little bit of time. So the last thing that I want to share with you, though, is if you're in a third world country, if it exists as your passion, that should be it. That's all that matters. There's a saying that says what you want to do is you want to jump off a cliff and if you want to fly, jump off the cliff and grow your wings later. So if you've got the passion, just do it. Do it today. Don't do it tomorrow. Don't schedule it for sometime later, because life will always get in the way of whatever you want to do. New things are always going to come up. And if you don't make it your priority, it will never become your priority. So if you decide to do it, you've got to commit to it as a priority. And that's the key thing. Even if the market doesn't think there's a space for it, at some point the market did not have a space for a cell phone, did not have a space for a one-button cell phone. When Steve Jobs said we're going to have this phone, it's going to have one button only, everybody thought it was crazy. Okay, and even if the closest people to you say they don't get it, it's not for them to get, it's for you to get it. And if they see the passion that you have, that you get it, that you really, really deep down love what you do, it's infectious. They will want to love it too. They will want to understand why you're so happy, why you feel so fulfilled. They will want to be part of your journey. But if you don't make it look like you believe in this journey, and you go and half-heartedly tell them that I'm doing this new thing that nobody's ever done, then you'll be like, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if it's possible. Then you're never going to get it done. You're never going to have that breakthrough. And I always say, approach everything like a child. So you got to look at it. Think of yourself as a 2-year-old that is discovering the world. So break it, open it. If it doesn't work, that's fine. It's not. Mistakes are only but lessons. So understand why it didn't. Don't give up because it didn't. Just believe in it. You lose absolutely nothing from being kind. Love it. Thank you. Penguin says you have everything to gain from being kind. So why not? Absolutely. And so that's the critical aspect. Believe in the project. If you don't believe in the project yourself, you're never going to convince anyone else to believe in the process. And that's going to be my message, especially if you're doing something and you're going to have to be the first one. There is no other way around it. It's going to be lonely. It's going to feel like nobody understands you. And sometimes you're going to want to delete your whole catalog and say, no, why am I doing this? But I'll tell you that I'm glad I did it, because now other kids are now beginning to believe in the process. And also now radio stations are beginning to understand the concept of podcasting their work and stuff like that. Before, they didn't used to do it. So you can only but develop the society you live in by doing something else that no one else has done. So that's going to be my key takeaway. And as far as this is concerned, always, absolutely always believe in what you do. There's no other way around it. And if, right, like I said earlier on, use what you have. You have the passion, you have the mind. And sometimes you have a laptop, sometimes it's just a phone. You can record off a phone, find out the technology around it, use it. There is nothing stopping you except yourself. And if you decide that to stop yourself and to get in the way of your own dream, wow, that's just sad. I'm hoping that this has been enlightening for people. I'm hoping that I shared the experiences from Zimbabwe. I'm sitting here in Harare at an office, and Harare in Zimbabwe, we're going through some difficult times at the moment as far as the country is concerned, but we always find a way to come together somehow. We always find a way to be okay at the end of the day. So just, which city in Zimbabwe are you? As I said, I'm in Harare, which is the capital city. I come from a place called Bulawayo, which is about 500 kilometers away from here, just under 500 kilometers away from here. It's in southern Zimbabwe and that sort of thing. So, by the way, if you want to get in touch with me, my podcast, I'm just going to type my podcast name in there. That's the name of the podcast. I hope it shows up. Yes, and I'm just going to put in also you can get it on iTunes. If you just search for that over on Google, you can get it on iTunes, on Iono. All episodes, of course, are free. And feedback, you can get in touch with me on my Twitter handle is exactly that name, Kwirirayi. That's my Twitter handle. Follow. And if you have any questions, and if you want to, I'm going to put in my email as well. If you want to get in touch with me with any questions, or if you need any advice and that sort of thing. And also, if you want to check out my website, where we do a lot of content, you can check out that's a website. It's more news focused. It's a completely different kettle of fish from podcasting day. I'm sorry. I hope that there wasn't a rule around links or anything like that. Sorry if I broke that rule, but essentially those are the main platforms. On Facebook, if you just search for Kwirirayi, I'm probably the most famous Kwirirayi in the world because it's not a very popular surname. So if you look for Kwirirayi on the internet spelled as that, you can find out a lot of the other work that I'm up to and that sort of thing. So please make sure you get in touch with me. Kyle, yes, that's my hometown, Bulawayo. So yeah, that's where I grew up. That's my hometown as well. So please feel free to get in touch. I'm available all the time. And I'm always willing to answer. I'm always willing to help. I didn't get to where I was without help. I didn't figure it out on my own. Like I said, I networked, I learned, I Googled, I talked to people who would do it. I did everything I could to get to where I was. So please do get in touch with me, and let's keep the conversation going. And I just want to say thank you very much to Dave and the team for making me part of the International Podcast Day. It's a very important moment for my country, not just me, because a lot of the news that comes out of our country isn't great all the time. People think that we're mad hatters and everybody's, try to do all sorts of things to each other. We're not there. We're still kind to each other. We love each other. And that opportunity to show that we are doing certain things in Zimbabwe. We might be a little bit behind on certain technology and sort of thing, but in as far as being part of the national conversation or the international conversation, we're doing what we can.
Larry, thank you so much. That was amazing to hear your perspective from that region. It's the reason I wanted you on here. It's because you're providing a new perspective in a growing podcasting space that you said has its limitations, but there are podcasters out there. There are people that are doing big things out there. And thank you for sharing the message of that region. I truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you very much once again for the opportunity. When I was hashtag International Podcast Day last year, I didn't realize that they'd be hashtagging about me next.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. When I saw you, I was like,
yeah,
I was gonna say when I saw you, I had to connect because I was like, we need this guy on our event next year because it's truly what the event is about, the internationality of podcasting and connecting with listeners and the growth around the world. So on behalf of myself and the International Podcast Day team, thank you, Larry, for representing yourself, your podcast, and the nation of Zimbabwe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And as we say in our language, asili siyasebenza, which means we're not fighting, we're just working.
Love it. Well, thank you guys. Right. Be sure you get out there and use hashtag International Podcast Day on behalf of our sponsors, Blueberry, Podcast Studio 21 Cafe, The Messengers, a podcast documentary, and Potable. We appreciate it. Thanks, and happy International Podcast Day, everybody.